All right, good morning. It's Thursday, October 13th. Today's reading will be Matthew chapters 22 through 24. Good to see you today. Now, chapter 22 talks about the parable of the marriage feast, whereas the earlier parables were talking about a little present time, a little future using parables. This goes back to the beginning present time of why the kingdom will be turned over to a Gentile church instead of a Jewish one. Jesus, talks to them and catches them in their words, uses questions. Then you look at chapter 23, and we'll read chapter 23. This is not how Jesus is portrayed in modern Christianity. He's calling out the religious elite. And throughout the chapter 23, hammers them pretty hard. Now, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on those two chapters so that I could reserve some time for chapter 24. Now, luckily, 24 and 25, and it just so happens to be split in our reading. We'll do chapter 25 tomorrow. But I wanted to take a little time in chapter 24 because this chapter is pretty important. I feel like this is probably in my Mount Rushmore of chapters that I've taught on and studied because it gives the outline for revelation and timing, and there's misunderstandings on it that make people miss some of the things. Now, it says there, Jesus went out and departed in the temple, and the disciples came to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, seeing all these things, verily I say unto you, there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now, verse 3 is the key to this chapter. Now, chapters 24 and 25 are called the Olivet Discourse. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, his disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming, which is different from the rapture, and of the end of the world? That question is the question that Jesus answers all throughout this chapter. This is not signs preceding the rapture. This is signs preceding the second coming. Everything in chapter 24 is during Daniel's 70th week. That's 7 years that pertains to the Jews. Verse 6 talks about wars and rumors of wars. I have this diagram here. I'll try to post it up in the description there. But when you look in that thing, the first 3.5 years are so peaceful. The Christians will be gone. They'll be raptured out. It's going to be so peaceful. The Antichrist will confirm the covenant. A new temple will have to be built. That temple will either be on the same mount as the mosque, or it will be next to it, or one will be gone, one the other, whatever the case is. But there is going to be such a peaceful time. When that verse 6 talks about wars and rumors of wars, that's because there won't be. If there's a war now, there's always a war. There's always a rumor of war. So that isn't talking about time before the rapture. That's talking about the time before the halfway point of the tribulation. And notice verse 8 says this is the beginning of sorrows. Sometimes we use the wrong term. The whole 7 years isn't the Great Tribulation, just the last 3.5. But we call it the tribulation, and I'm not going to stop calling that. But so that people know the last 3.5 is the bad part, look at us and then make fun and say, and actually change the time of the rapture to pre-wrath or mid-tribulation. It's pre-trib, but because we call it the tribulation, the whole 7, and only the last 3.5 are turbulent times, then, we kind of get mocked for that. And then the famous verse 13 says here, But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. Now, looking again at the chart that I post here, people who live until the end of the tribulation and make it through alive, that's what it's talking about. This doesn't mean, that if you stay faithful to Christ all your life and endure unto the end, you shall be saved. In context, it's talking about those people who live through the tribulation. Now remember, we won't be there. The church is raptured out beforehand. This is talking about people living, making it through, and hopefully being one of the sheep nations we're going to find out in chapter 25. All right, another verse that I've heard misused, verse 14. In this gospel, the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. So what's interesting is, we could say that was fulfilled in Acts chapter 2, verse 5. It's fulfilled in Revelation chapter 7, but it's not talking about the Acts chapter 2, verse 5 it's not talking about now. The 144,000 Jews will be preaching the gospel of the kingdom during the tribulation. People will be getting saved. And that gospel must be preached to the whole world. The two witnesses are going to be preaching the gospel. Matter of fact, everybody's gonna hear it at some point, and there's not going to be an excuse for not getting saved. Then verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whosoever readeth, let him understand. Let him which be in Judea flee into the mountains. That's going to be the second half of the tribulation. The 3.5 years are going to be hell on earth. Jesus told them to flee. Get out of the area. Because when Armageddon happens, Jesus' return, it's going to be a geographical location that gets destroyed. It's going to be all, right around Judea. Jesus will stand on the mountains. The mountains will split. He will speak, and everybody in the vicinity will die. So that's why I said to flee. All right, now verse 21, then it says here, for then shall be great tribulation, such as not since the beginning of the world till to this time, no, nor ever shall be. That will be the second half of the tribulation. And that's when most of your seals, trumpets, and vials are happening. Now verse 22. Now we know it has to be 1,260 days. It has to be time, times, and half time, 3.5 years. It has to be a certain number of days, has to be in a certain number. So when you get here to verse 22, and except those days should be shortened, there should be no flesh be saved. Notice that says flesh be saved. He that endureth the end shall be saved. It's defined right here in verse 22 what it's talking about and saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. And we can find that also in Amos chapter 8, verse 9. And what's actually going to happen, I believe, because the number of days have to stay consistent, that can't change, is that the earth, God will cause the earth to spin faster. Some of the destruction we find will be because of that. When John says he saw that the stars of heaven fell like a scroll, I believe if you see a video of the night sky and it's fast forwarded, it looks like the stars are a scroll. Now in this chapter, I believe most of the time when it says elect, it's talking about Jews. And there's links all over I can show you here, but I'm not going to do that. All right, then we look at verse 29 here. It says, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. Now that's the sixth seal from Revelation chapter 6, which then also gives us a little key and a little clue that Revelation is not in chronological order. All right, and then some more confusion here. In verse 30, now it already just said in verse 29, after the tribulation. Now it says here in verse 30, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. That's going to be awesome. We're going to be riding with him. Then verse 31, watch this. And he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, and of one end of heaven to the other. And that's where people try to say that the rapture won't happen until after. But to be clear, if we're going to place the rapture right here, that's even post-wrath. So what's happening here, and if you look back at my graph that I'll put up here again, there towards the end, it's the gleanings. Remember, the word rapture is not found in the Bible, but however, it's still, the rapture is found in the Bible. But the snatching away of taking people off earth doesn't only happen there. Enoch, Elijah, Jesus. And then we come to the rapture of the saints. That happens before the tribulation. Then we're going to have the two witnesses that are pulled up. So when this is talking about here, it's talking about gleanings. It's talking about those people that got saved. They believed the gospel during the tribulation, will be called out, and there will be a gleanings. There will be another rapture there. Christ returns. There's nobody saved on the planet. And then that's where the sheep and goat nations come in for tomorrow. We'll read that in 25. Now it's interesting. You look here at verse 34. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. And so that talks about the parable of the fig tree. So what people have tried to do now for 60 years is to pin the fig tree as Israel, and then just because the nation was reborn in the 40s after World War II, then it has to be within that generation that all these things happened. And that's not the teaching here. When it says this generation shall not pass, in other words, the tribulation is going to be short. all within one generation. And 7 years is well within one generation. And so what he's telling you, those people that are alive during that time will see all of it. Not talking about people during that time. It's not talking about people, that were around for Israel's rebirth. It is talking about the people during the tribulation. Then something that gets read into Scripture, Jesus said, so just as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be during this time. And so people try to equate, how people were acting during Noah's time, and that's not the teaching. Read it. It says there, but as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. They were just simply living their lives. That's how it's going to be. This isn't an indication of morality. This is an indication of people are just going to go about living their lives, and all of a sudden, bam, it happens. All right, and I'll save that parable at the end of chapter 24 for some other time, probably. All right, tomorrow, chapters 25, 26, and 27. We're going to have to stay with the goat and sheep nations a little bit, so we might spend a little extra time there. But we have to cover the virgins and the oil and the lamp and how that's not the church, and that's not talking about Christians. All right. None of chapter 25 is talking about Christians. Let's just be clear there. And we'll do that tomorrow. It's going to be a lot of fun. All right. Hope this was helpful to you. Hope you learned something from it. Have a great Thursday. Catch you later.